Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology and leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading and notebooks and writing, mixed in with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. You can expect regular weekly episodes focused on 3 books you need to know about on a bookish theme and how to bring those themes to life in our actual lives too. You can also expect author interviews, notebooking inspiration, and topics to help us grow through what we go through and take inspired action to make our lives better. So grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Get Literate podcast, a podcast where we celebrate the power of reading and writing to make life better. I'm Stephanie, your host, here to introduce today's special author conversation. This month, my one-word theme is bibliolatry. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know what bibliolatry is, but if you're new here today, welcome. Bibliolatry means the adoration of a book or paying homage to a book. And we can adore a book for a whole host of reasons. Maybe it's our favorite genre, we loved the content or the characters, the book sparked something inside of ourselves, the format was wonderful. There are all sorts of reasons to adore a book. Today's book that I'm going to share with you, I adore for multiple reasons. Number one, the book has a list-like element, and you know that I love a good listicle. Number two, the book celebrates personal development, and this is what this podcast is all about, making life better in whatever way we can, but especially through reading and writing. It also is a book to spark action, whether that action is reflection or that action is doing something differently right away in your own life, or the fourth reason I love the book, it sparks writing. There is notebooking and writing all throughout the book, which you know I love. But the fifth reason I adore it is because it's part book, part journal. And those are 2 of my favorite things. Now, one more, I promise, one last reason why I adore this book, and I'm talking with the author today, is because of who recommended it to me. So Terry M. Brown has been on the podcast multiple times before. She is the author of Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, An Enemy Like Me, and my favorite, her recent Daughters of Green Mountain Gap. She talked with Carol. She knew I would love the book, and I think she knew that I needed it right now too. It was a perfect timing, synchronicity kind of book. She was right. Here we are. And now I'm finally going to tell you the name of that book and who the author is. The book we're talking about today are 10 Little Rules for a Blissy Life with Carol Pearson. Carol, welcome to the Get Literate podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
Stephanie, thank you so much. And I was listening to those reasons why you love the book, and I just had never thought of it in those terms. And you kind of opened my eyes a little bit. That was really interesting.
Well, good. I'm glad. I have so many things I loved about the book, so many things I think we could talk about, whether that's rules for living, personal development, meditation, journaling, notebooking. There are so many different directions we could go in. But I'm going to let you take it over first. And I would love for you to introduce yourself to listeners, kind of the journey you've taken to this book to get us started.
Great. So the journey started back during the Great Recession in 2009, when within the course of about 8 weeks, everything about my life changed. I was dealing with an empty nest. My husband and I of 24 years were in the process of divorcing. He lost his job. My business partners destroyed the business, so I lost my income, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We were upside down on our mortgage on a house that we had to sell everything. And within that short span of time, my life just became unrecognizable. Like I everything I thought I knew about my life was gone. And so I started digging. I just started kind of plowing my way, trying to find a new path. And about a year later, my good friend Lori said to me, I don't get it. You're in debt, you're broke, you're struggling to rebuild your business. Your kids aren't your biggest fans right now. You're still dealing with the aftermath of the divorce. You're happier than I've ever seen you. What's your secret?
Mm.
And I thought about that and I'm like, well, I'm finally living by my own rules. I get to write my rule book, not based on how I was raised or what society wants or what I'm supposed to be as a wife and mom and all of those things. And so I just started thinking on that, and it somehow turned into this book, 10 Little Rules for a Blissy Life. And that's where the whole thing started.
I love when something wonderful comes out of something that wasn't so wonderful before,
Yeah.
right? It's a good lesson. It's a good reminder. I'm curious about the title. So it's
Mhm.
10 Little Rules for a Blissy Life. And I'm wondering what made you choose blissy as your adjective rather than joyful or happy or whatever other words someone might think of. I was instantly pulled to that word blissy because it was different. And it really does convey, at least to me, this certain kind of really positive emotion. So
Mhm.
I'm curious what made you choose that particular word.
Stephanie, nobody's ever asked me that. I love that question.
Oh, wonderful.
I really love that question. I think what the word means to me, bliss, goes beyond things are good, things are great, things are perfect, my bills are paid, all of those
Yeah,
things that we use to sort of define, are we good? Are we okay? And it was an idea of this is how I feel in spite of all of this, right? And I'm developing my inner joy, my inner peace, my inner bliss. And it just seemed like the right word for it.
yeah. It definitely conveys this large amount of joy or happiness or bliss. It's not just a life well lived, it's a life really well lived. At least in my view, that's the kind of emotion that comes through for that. But I
It
do
also
echo, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It also signifies to me the fact that I was taking responsibility for my life, right? It's no longer about the things that are happening to me. It's how I deal with those things. It's what I learn from those things. How, as you say, we grow through what we go through.
Yeah,
Really just living that idea that this is your life, girlfriend. You have got to get this sorted out.
yeah. And you do say early on in the book, it was the first quote of many that I have jotted down in my quote notebook. Um, I had free choice all along. I just never realized it.
Mhm. It's so true, right? We live within these shoulds. I'm raised a certain way, so that's the way I should be raising my kids, or I live in a certain kind of place, so that's the type of place I should look for, or the type of marriage I should have. Um, if being suddenly single at the age of 48 and realizing this is the first time in my life I've ever just been the only one that has the key to where I live.
Mm,
That was stunning. Like, this isn't where I should be at this point in my life, right? And so just realizing the power in that this is my journey. This is nobody else's decisions to make. I'll seek counsel. I have mentors, beautiful friends and support system, but ultimately I get to decide.
yeah. I get to decide is a very powerful realization.
Yes.
Once you realize it and then believe it.
And
And
then believe it. And then back it up by understanding what are the things that are important to you so that as you're deciding, you can make a whole lot of really bad decisions. If you focus on what you want out of life, right? You want security and you want health and you want loving relationships and you want inner peace, then those decisions become easier. So those shoulds, they sort of guide you in that path automatically, and you don't have to be so afraid about making those decisions.
mm, yeah. So I'm going to echo the question that your friend asked you,
Mhm.
which is how did you get here? How did you go from that point of your life, which just had complication on top of complication and challenge, to the point where you realized you are living by your own rules? Where,
Mhm.
tell me about that messy middle. What exactly did you do to go from point A to point B?
Wow, another great question. A few things in particular. I adopted a strict meditation process. So every day, rule number one, get to source. I spent some amount of time just really shutting everything off, going inward. And meditation, I always tell people, or getting to source can be whatever works for you. For me, it's meditation, working in a garden or walking on a beach. For other people, it might be going to church, saying prayers, water skiing. My brother, he's skiing. That's his source. That's his bliss. So I start every day with that. Um, the second part of that is, again, understanding what you want. And it's not about, I want a new apartment or I need a better job. It's looking past that to the intention. I want financial security. Um, I want to feel successful at work, etc. And then setting those intentions. And this has been key for me. So you set those intentions and then you have to let go of how that's going to happen, right? I use a lot of vision boards for my new life, including I had a financial vision board. And I took my current bank statement, which was ridiculous. It was in the negative because it included everything I owed, a good five figure in the minus column, and put it up there, whited it out, and wrote 000. I wanted to be out of debt. I had no idea at that point how I was going to get there, but because that was sitting right by my computer where I did all my finances, every day I'd look at that, no debt, no debt, no debt. And somehow letting go of those hows and focusing on that attention got me there. Little by little, it just influenced the decisions I made and the opportunities I pursued or didn't.
Yeah, and that whole aspect of what you just said really fascinates me recently. The whole idea that thoughts become things, right?
Oh yeah.
What we think puts a certain energy, a certain whatever you want to call it, or how, depending on how woo you want to get, but there's a lot of science behind this of what you think becomes what you put in the world, what you see in the world, what comes back to you. And I'm fascinated by how that works because I'm not one that always did that,
Mhm.
right? I'm the one that worries about the things and tries to figure out the solutions.
Mhm.
And this was, I have, there is a quote in your book that I wrote down where you said it's about believing in the best version you have for your life and then living in a way that honors it and encourages it to materialize. You're not
Mhm.
obsessing on the 15 things that just happened to you. You switched the way that you thought. You surrounded yourself with those reminders. And then I think the hardest part of all is just letting go of what it might look like and that it can come to you in whatever way it does.
Especially for people like you and me, Stephanie, list
Uh-huh.
makers, goal setters,
Yeah.
type A's, to let go of how that's going to happen and just let that inspired next step be what I do. That was, it's still hard. I still have lists, I'm on number 44 right here on just my by my desk list. Um, but really focusing on, it's okay. There's going to be delightful coincidences and synchronicities that come into your life if you're looking up from your to-do list
Yeah.
enough to see them. And I think that was a real powerful change in my life. Um, and it is fascinating. I'm on a campaign to normalize woo-woo because I know we all kind of say that almost apologetically, but
Yes, we do.
traditions, intentions, and meditation, these go back to the oldest religious and spiritual practices on earth. It's nothing new agey about them. And, normalize woo-woo. I think that's my new mantra.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. And there's so much science coming out to back this up, right? We've got books like Your Brain on Art, which talks about the role of creativity and thinking. And then you have Mind to Matter, which is
Mhm.
another book I just read that I loved, which literally gave the science step by step of how that one thought turns into a chemical, which then turns into something else. It's just it fascinates me. But you're right, we do tend to apologize a little bit for the wooey side, but I got to tell you, all the people I look up to, all the people I admire, all the people that I love their life or I wish that I had elements of it, they all subscribe to this belief. There is something in it, right? That works for sure.
There really is, and I'm the same way. I look at my close circle of advisors and mentors and friends and the people I really go to, and there's nothing unusual at all about having these kind of wild conversations about this. It's fun, and it lets you experience life with a wow, well, what if this sort of attitude? And how often do we really let ourselves go there, right? Imagine something better.
Right.
It's one thing when I do intentional thinking, I always leave that little or better space. Like I'm looking for this. I'm going to manifest this or better. And it's amazing how often the universe just kind of goes, there you go. That's a little better.
Right.
And I never would have thought to even consider that.
Right. It's the expectations that you have for what's possible
Mhm.
for yourself, and then figuring out um, what you want in relation to those expectations. And you talk a lot about just listen to your heart, listen to your feelings. What are you feeling? And I really connected deeply with that because this year I completely threw out the old way of doing New Year's resolutions, which is do this thing or reach this goal. And instead, I just had three feelings that I wanted to cultivate all year long. I wanted to wake up and I wanted to feel good. I have a lot of chronic pain. So, like, I want to be pain free and feel good. Number two, I want to do stuff that I love and feel financially abundant in that. And then number three, I just want to love the people that are around me. And I loved this shift. I wish it didn't take me 40 something years to figure out the shift because no matter what happens around me, each day there is one thing I can do to feel each of those things. And that's a big game changer. So I loved your focus on feelings. It was actually number 2 and 3 to listen to your heart and feel and then decide, although it is embedded, I would say, through the other rules. But if I had to ask you, I'm going to ask you a hard question, I think, because you have 10 rules,
Mhm.
10 rules for Blissy Life. And I won't read them all because I want them to go find them for themselves. But my question is, we'll have two questions. So question one, are these in order? Like, are these in order of importance where you think one needs to come before the other? Or are these just rules that you've kind of cultivated and decided and laid out for yourself that just are interconnected together?
That's another good question. Uh, Keep in mind that this was 12 years ago me writing this, reading this now. They are in rules in terms of rule number 1, 2, and 3. Absolutely. It all starts with getting to source.
Mhm.
And then once you get to source, you can hear what your heart's saying. And it's so powerful when you actually take the time to listen. And so often we don't like what we hear, right? We
Yes,
don't want to know that. Yeah.
yes.
And then feeling that anxiety, the stress or the joy or whatever that brings, and deciding rules 4 through 8 sort of just no particular order, just kind of build off of one another. Rule number 9 was really important to me as I started building a new life I was living in an unrecognizable life, but building that idea of building familiarity, making those rituals. And then key, every night, give thanks, rule number 10. And I expand that now to give thanks all the time. But at the time, during my no good horrible year, as I call it, I started keeping a gratitude journal on January 1st, and I was determined to look for the good in every day. And it became such a powerful reminder that life is what we make of it. And if we can focus on those good things, we can amplify them. So Yes, some order, and also realizing now if I wrote the book again, there would be some differences in how I structured it and what the rules are. Because again, I've grown since then, and we have to allow ourselves to change.
Yeah.
And I did listen to your New Year's podcast, Stephanie, and I was fascinated by those three things and the approach you were taking. And it made me feel like, yep, we're going to have a great conversation. This
Sure,
is
we are. Yeah.
exactly what we need to talk about.
So, you've talked about you have to kind of get quiet, get to source, you have to listen, and that what comes up may change, right? Depending on the season you're in. I think that is the hardest for me because these rules, these shoulds that we've talked about, they often come from childhood, they come from society norms, they come from maybe a relationship that we had but isn't as strong. I find it really hard to shift through the different seasons of my life, right? So,
Mm.
for example, when I was an elementary school teacher, you got up, you did the things, you were at school until this time, you came home, you did this, you did that. As I shift positions, as I shift what I do, I don't necessarily have to eat breakfast at 6 a.m. or, exercise at 5 in the morning because my day is going to be so exhausting the rest of the day. I find it really hard to make those shifts because those routines, because I love a routine and I love a to-do list and I am a Gretchen Rubin upholder into the end. I can find it hard to get out of my own way in terms of that routine. So what I loved about your book that I mentioned is that it's part book, part notebook, or part book, part journal, depending on the word that someone uses. Do you find that the empty page, the blank page, helps in figuring out what our voice is trying to say to us? Is notebooking or has notebooking or journaling been an important part of your journey in figuring out these 10 rules?
It's interesting. I would never have called myself a journaler or a notebooker. And I still don't have a daily journaling practice, but that gratitude journal was a game changer. And as I've developed into my newest version of me, I started keeping really specific topic journals. For instance, I had an anxiety journal that I kept next to the bed because that's when it all happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? And I would get up and just write in it, what I'm feeling. And then the next day kind of amplify that and talk through it from a more awake point of view. And putting it on paper and seeing those words, it becomes as if I'm having a conversation with myself. I don't know if, do you understand that feeling or
Oh,
do you
I
understand?
totally understand that feeling every morning in morning pages.
And it's like I find it's my better self speaking to me. So I
Yes.
really start to pay attention. And by the time I'm through, like my anxiety journal entries, by the time I'm through writing it all out, it's like, oh, okay, I really didn't need to be worried about that all night long because here's the obvious solution or the next step or the who I'm going to be. Um, but you're right, when you go through those periods where things change, and I just had another recent when we moved from North Carolina back to Michigan to be closer to the family and the grandbabies and everything. And so my whole life that was down there and all of my rituals and my meditation was the walk on the beach, and I'm not by the ocean anymore. Who am I now? Now that I'm really diving into this Gigi role and, focusing again back on the family, it's difficult. It's really difficult. So to be able to put it down on paper, what am I feeling? Not even why I'm feeling, but an understanding of actually what I'm feeling and let those feelings flow and just be able to sit with them for a little bit and then decide what to do about it. Do I need a part-time job? Do I need to volunteer? Do I need more time by myself? Do I need more couple time, etc.? But kind of let it all marinate before you make any big bold decisions.
Yeah. And each one of your rules comes along with a couple of questions
Mhm.
that can get that process started for
Mhm.
for someone who might be overwhelmed at the idea of doing a life reflection like that. You've broken it down per rule so that we can start to see how we might think about our own life, how we might take little, as you mentioned, those little small actions that can happen. And as
Mhm.
someone who works with a lot of people around journaling, I know that blank page can be very intimidating,
Mhm.
and we can be afraid to write in it for a whole host of reasons. So I like that you chose to put those prompted questions because it gave me a faster starting point than just thinking about your rule and, oh, could this be a rule for me? Instead, you gave me a couple of prompts to think about. Were those the same prompts that helped you, or were those kind of emerged from the process of how could I help share this with others? I'm just curious if those were what you used to get into this blissy state.
Not really. It was more of an afterwards, like, okay, my rules just sort of came to me. It was almost a meditative process of how those rules how I became aware of them in conscious thought. But then as I'm writing the story and then realizing that I really do want to share this with other people, I thought, okay, these are my rules. I'm not going to presume that these are anybody else's rules. So how do I make that switch possible, right? How can I kind of seed those prompts out there so that they can think about it their own way? And that's also why we call them 10 little rules, because they're just my little rules. They're not Nobody's handing you another rule book, because we're trying to get away from that, but build your own little rules.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was all about, I said from the start, if I can help just one person, then all of this, figuring out self-publishing and doing all of that craziness, then it'll be worth it. And I was in the chiropractor's office one day, in the warm-up room, I call it, when they put you on the roller bed to get you all relaxed, the lights are off. The office manager knocks on the door and she's like, "Carol, there's somebody here to see you." Now? Okay. She said, "Can she come in?" It was this woman I didn't know, but she had heard me. I spoke at a local community group and she had heard me, and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, you're the one that wrote the book, right? It's changed my life. And I was in a really bad spot. And now I know what to do to move out of it. Like, wow, okay, that's crazy. But the crazy thing was, how did she know I was in this
Right,
room?
in the
Like,
chiropractor.
yeah, she looked at she saw my name above hers on the sign-in list, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta go talk to her."
Oh, talk about the little synchronicities like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
must have felt wonderful.
it really did. And so that just made it really clear to me that this approach, sharing my story, giving those questions, and then leaving space for the reader to write their own story, was really important.
Yeah.
Now we've grown into 7 books. I have 6 authors and another 2 coming on this year, and it's a whole series. And we call it a guided journaling experience.
Mhm.
Because like you said, journal. Okay, where do I start? Well, this is
Yeah.
really intimidating. This is really scary. So it's um, kind of will ease you into it.
Yeah. And the fact that you provided literal space in
Mhm.
the book, I think is so prompting. The book is full of figurative space to reflect because the reader can't help but not do so as they're reading. But when you see that space and there are blank pages with lines just waiting for you to fill them, that is a wonderful invitation. And you do say in the book, um, you talk about your hope for the book, and I was going to read this sentence because this actually is what I wrote at the top of one of my blank journals as I think about my own rules. And you said, "My hope is that you'll use this book to explore the things that truly matter to you and recognize the ways in which your rules, real or imagined," that's an important part, "are keeping you from true and profound happiness." So it is your goal to get others to think about their own personal rules.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as I've collected this amazing community of authors who had their own stories to tell, and we all come at it from different perspectives. One of our authors, Mickey Beach, wrote 10 Little Rules for Finding Your Truth, and she bases hers around her yoga practice. She's a yoga instructor, and that how the different poses help you find your truth in that way. We have 10 Little Rules for Mermaids, about from
I s-
a woman who's not really a mermaid, but she's she is like a modern day embodiment of this mythical, rise from the ashes kind of woman. It's just powerful. And creativity and sharing your story. And Wendy, who wrote a book, 10 Little Rules for Hank, who has a rare disease. So how to raise a child and have a family with this rare disease, taking control of everything, and how to move through that. Because we all have our different stories to tell. And so the
right.
books all kind of reflect that idea of, this is me, I know you're you, here's some stuff if it might help. And here, here's a place to play with this.
I didn't think of it that way. I love that you have just said that, because in my notebook, I started creating my own personal rules for a personally blissy life, right? What are Stephanie's rules for a blissy life? But
Wow.
now you've really got me thinking, because I've talked in the past about my reading rules. Like, what are the rules that we have for our reading life? And how do they give us clues to our actual life? So, for example, one of our reading rules might be you have to read a book from start to finish and you cannot abandon a book, right? Wherever that rule came from, that may be a rule you have. And how does that connect to your actual life? Do you not allow yourself to stop doing things that don't feel good just because you think you have to push through? So
Mhm.
I talk a lot about our reading rules and how thinking about how they've been made, how they've been created. Do you want to break them? Do you want to rewrite them? Can offer a useful analogy for thinking about the rules in our own life. And I didn't even think about coming up with 10 rules, for a restorative reading life, which is one of the topics that I love. So now I'm going to have a new page in my notebook. I'm going to have to follow up with you and say, here you go. Here's my personal 10 rules for a blissy life. And here are my 10 rules for a really restorative reading life too. And so now I've got more writing to do.
Oh, I love that, Stephanie. And that's how some of the conversations with soon to be authors come up. They're like, oh, I read your book and, I didn't realize this, but I have rules around dog walking or whatever. And
Yeah.
I'm so excited to hear you say that it took off in that direction. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and I imagine listeners are sitting here thinking, yeah, what are the rules? We have so many
Mhm.
rules that we don't even understand that we have placed on ourselves, and we don't need to wait for a big life change or
Mhm.
a big negative event to remind us that we can rewrite them. We can just read
Exactly.
your book and make that change right away.
One of my authors, Amy, who wrote 10 Little Rules for Mermaids, also wrote 10 Little Rules for Serving You. And it's part rules, part journaling, but also part cookbook. We have a lot of recipes in there because she has a very restricted diet in terms of what works for her and what doesn't. And she gives a lot of great kitchen tips, a lot of fun ideas, some really amazing recipes all around what's healthy for her. But throughout it all, she stresses, this is me. I can't do dairy. I can't do this or that. I understand yours are different. So write about your own, jot down your notes about how you could modify these recipes to make it more adaptive for your situation. And it's amazing when we do stop and think about the rules that are running our life and where they came from and how strict we are. I have no problem shutting a book and never picking it up again if it disturbs my soul, right? And sometimes I can read something and it doesn't bother me, but maybe if I'd read that 6 months earlier, it would have really upset me. I read a Barbara Kingsolver book and I love her writing. She's so talented. I got to the last, I don't know, 1/5 of the book and I'm like, this is going to end so heartbreakingly that I just can't right now.
Yeah.
And I put it down and went back about a month later and it was fine. But knowing your own limits and being gentle, being kind with yourself.
Mm.
We're our own worst critics, but we should be our own best friends because this is the longest relationship you're ever going to have is with you. If this isn't the best relationship in your life, we have some work to do. And I still struggle with that. It's still a huge, the negative talk, the bad self-talk be pretty firm with myself and remind myself that this is my most important relationship, because if your relationship with yourself doesn't work, your relationships with the rest of the world are going to have a lot of problems.
I don't have words to follow up with that. I feel like that is the mic drop message of this whole podcast. Your relationship with yourself is it's the longest one we're going to have. And if that one can't be positive, how can we expect to put out something positive to anyone else? Oh,
Exactly. I just got chills, Stephanie. I'm having such a great time talking with you about all of
oh, I
this.
got chills. You're the one that just said those mic drop words. I'm furiously scribbling them down. That really is, it's a game changer kind of understanding, because I think so much of what we get is how to be a better human, how to be a better mom, how to be better at work, all of these ways to so-called make life better, like I talk about on this podcast. But it really is something that has to start with ourselves. How do we make ourselves better? And better being defined of whatever each individual person wants to feel
Mhm.
good on the inside. Wow.
It's the old put on your own oxygen mask that we've all heard.
Yes.
But it really is true. I found myself the last couple of weeks becoming a grandmother again, and being very close, 10 minutes away from my daughter. And so trying to fill her freezer so they'd have meals. And then, it was just been a busy couple of weeks. And I came home and I told John, I said, I need to take care of myself a little bit today. I need to just, not bake bread for anybody else, or not make another pot of soup, or not, it just, um, because when we're in tune with that, we can start to feel it, and we know we're depleting ourselves, and then we really are no good to anybody else. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for everyone, as you mentioned, source is different for everyone.
Mhm.
And taking care of yourself is different for everyone.
Mhm.
For me, picking up a good book or spending a half an hour with my notebook is the thing that makes me feel better. But for someone else, it's just figuring out what that thing is for you and then doing more of it.
Exactly. Do more of that. I
Right.
love that.
Right. Oh, well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I have notes and mic drop lines scribbled everywhere, but I'm going to hold on to that last one you said, which is our relationship with ourselves is the longest and most important one we'll have. And that's what, that's just, that's what we need to focus on. And your 10 rules for a blissy life just prompt us to think about that. So I'm so grateful that you made something wonderful come out of that hard situation. I'm so grateful to be able to share this with listeners. And hopefully, as you said, it will just get them to think maybe a little creatively about what direction they may want to take their own rules in. It's the perfect time of year still. It's still the beginning of the year. Everyone is still thinking, but we're hitting that little dip phase. And so what better point to just reacquaint yourself with yourself and take some time to reflect.
Stephanie, I have had such a great time today, and I really appreciate the space you kept open for me, because when I talk about these things, new ideas are always coming out, new ways of looking at it. And I've had a few more breakthroughs today, and I really am so grateful for this time.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. Where can listeners find you so they can grab your book and take a look in the books in the other series as well?
Super. We are at my website is 10littlerules.com, 10 little rules. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn at 10 Little Rules. Drop us a note. We love emails. We love messages. You can also search for 10 Little Rules on Amazon or Bookshop and find us there.
Okay. And
And
oh,
just
go ahead.
because I know all your audience loves journaling, I'm going to create a coupon on our website, and the coupon will be get lit, And if you use that coupon, I'll toss a free journal or two into your order.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you for that. So now they can grab this book or any of the others that we mentioned, plus the oh, thank
Yep,
you for that. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well, along with
perfect.
all of the links so that they can get their hands on them. This has
Wonderful.
been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your time, for your words, with your experiences. It's been wonderful, and I'm gonna have to text Terry and thank her.
Please do. Thanks again, Stephanie.
All right. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. And I'll see you inside the next episode of the Get Literate podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. Plus, if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, bibliotherapy book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much, much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing, if you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.